The day I moved into my new apartment, I thought the hardest part would be carrying boxes up 3 flights of stairs. I was wrong. The hardest part turned out to be living next door to a man named Walter. The building itself wasn't anything special. Old brick walls, narrow hallways, flickering lights that looked like they hadn't been replaced in years. The kind of place where every apartment door had a different color because tenants had painted them. Over decades, rent was cheap, which was the only reason I could afford it. I had just finished moving my last box when I heard a knock on the door. I assumed it was the landlord. Instead, an older man stood there. Maybe late 60s, gray hair, thin frame, wearing the same brown jacket despite the summer heat. He looked past me into the apartment before speaking. "You're the new tenant?" I nodded. "Yeah." He stared for a second, then he smiled. Not a friendly smile. The kind of smile that makes you wonder if someone knows something you don't. "Good," he said. Then he handed me an envelope. I looked down. Inside were $500. Actual cash. I immediately thought there had been some kind of mistake. I think you have the wrong apartment." Walter shook his head. "No mistake." I looked at the money again. "What is this for?" His answer made absolutely no sense. "I'm paying you to follow one rule." I laughed. I genuinely thought he was joking. He didn't laugh back. "What rule?" Walter pointed toward the large window in my living room. Then he said something I would never forget. "Every night at exactly 11:13 p.m., don't look outside." I stared at him, waiting for the punchline. None came. For several seconds, we simply stood there. Then I laughed again. "You serious?" "Completely." The man sounded dead serious. I looked at the money, then back at him. "What happens if I do look outside?" His expression changed. The smile disappeared. "Just don't." Before I could ask another question, he turned around and walked away. I stood there holding the envelope, completely confused. $500 wasn't life-changing money. But it definitely wasn't pocket change either. And all I had to do was not look out a window? The entire thing felt ridiculous. I assumed it was some weird prank. Maybe an eccentric old neighbor with too much time and money. That night I completely forgot about it, until 11:12 p.m. My phone buzzed. Unknown number, one message. "Remember the rule." I immediately knew it was Walter. A second later, another message arrived. 11:13. I walked to the window, pulled the curtain slightly, then stopped. For some reason, I remembered the cash sitting on my kitchen counter. $500 for doing absolutely nothing. I shrugged, closed the curtain, and went to bed. The next morning, another envelope appeared under my door. Inside was another $100. No note, no explanation, just cash. Now I was interested. Over the next week, the same thing happened every night. 11:12 p.m. A reminder message. 11:13 p.m. Curtains closed. Next morning, more money. At first it felt easy. Then strange things started happening. On the 8th night, I heard screaming outside. Not playful screaming, not drunk people. Actual panic. I jumped out of bed. The sound came from the street below. Someone was yelling for help. My first instinct was to run to the window. Then my phone buzzed. "Walter. Do not look." I froze. The screaming continued, then stopped. Completely. The silence afterward felt even worse. The next morning, I checked local news. Nothing. No accidents. No crimes. No reports. Nothing at all. It was as if the entire thing had never happened. That should have been the moment I stopped participating. Instead, it made me more curious, because now I wanted answers. And humans are terrible at ignoring mysteries, especially when they're happening 20 feet outside their own window. Over the next few days, I started paying more attention to Walter. The man lived alone, never received visitors, never seemed to leave for more than an hour, and every evening around 11 p.m. he became visibly nervous. One night I watched him through the hallway peephole. At exactly 11:10 p.m., he locked his apartment door. Then he checked the lock 3 separate times. At 11:12 p.m., he sent me the usual reminder. At 11:13 p.m., all the lights in his apartment went out. Like clockwork, every single night. That's when I realized something. Walter wasn't trying to control me. Walter was scared. And whatever happened at 11:13 p.m., he was terrified of it. After that night, I couldn't stop thinking about Walter. The money no longer mattered. What mattered was the fact that a grown man seemed genuinely terrified of a specific time every night, and whatever happened at 11:13 p.m. was important enough for him to pay a stranger hundreds of dollars just to stay away from a window. I tried telling myself it was none of my business, but curiosity has a way of growing when it isn't fed. Every day I found myself watching Walter more closely. Every night I waited for the messages, and every night they arrived at exactly the same time. Remember the rule: nothing more, nothing less. 2 weeks later, something happened that changed everything. At 11:11 p.m., before Walter's usual text arrived, my apartment lost power. The entire building went dark. At first I assumed it was a normal outage. Then I looked outside and noticed the buildings across the street still had electricity. Only our building was dark. My phone buzzed. Walter. Stay away from the window. This time there was another message. No matter what you hear. A few seconds later, 11:13 arrived. At first there was silence. Then came a loud metallic sound from outside. It sounded like someone dragging something heavy across the street. Slowly, deliberately. The noise continued for nearly a minute. Then came footsteps. Lots of footsteps, more than one person, maybe 10, maybe 20. I couldn't tell. They moved together like a group. Then everything stopped. I stood in the darkness, barely breathing. Every instinct told me to look. I even reached for the curtain, but at the last second I pulled my hand back. The next morning I checked outside expecting to see something unusual. There was nothing, no damage, no police tape, no signs that anything had happened at all. It was as if the entire night had been erased. That afternoon I finally decided to talk to Walter. When he opened the door, he already looked annoyed. You have questions. It wasn't a question. What happens at 11:13? I asked. Walter stared at me. The less you know, the better. People were outside last night. I know. Who were they? Walter's face became serious. People who shouldn't be seen. I laughed. That doesn't even mean anything. Exactly. Then he closed the door. At that point, I was done listening. The mystery had completely taken over my life. That evening, I made a decision. I wasn't going to stare out the window. I wasn't going to throw the curtains open, but I was going to find another way. The next night, I placed my phone between 2 books on a shelf facing the window. The camera pointed directly outside. If something happened, I'd see it later. No rule broken. At least that's what I told myself. 11:12 p.m. The message arrived. Remember the rule. 11:13 p.m. The sounds started again. Footsteps, metal scraping across pavement. Then silence. I waited until morning before checking the recording. My hands were shaking as I opened the video. For several seconds, nothing happened. Then the timestamp reached 11:13. The screen suddenly glitched. The image distorted. The camera flickered. Static filled the display. Then the recording ended. I checked the file length. It should have been 3 hours. Instead, it stopped exactly at 11:13 p.m. I replayed it 5 times. Same result every time. The camera had failed at the exact moment I wanted answers. That's when I noticed something else. In the final frame before the recording cut out, there was a reflection in the glass. A shape. A figure standing directly outside my apartment. Looking in. My stomach dropped. The figure wasn't on the street. It wasn't across the road. It was right outside my window, 3 floors above the ground. And somehow, it was staring directly at me. I zoomed in on the image until it became blurry. I couldn't make out details. Just a silhouette. Tall, thin, motionless, watching. That night I couldn't sleep. For the first time since moving into the apartment, I started to understand why Walter was afraid. And deep down, I knew something else. The next time 11:13 p.m. arrived. I was going to break the rule. The next day felt longer than any day I could remember. I couldn't focus on work. I couldn't focus on anything. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that blurry figure standing outside my window, 3 floors above the ground, motionless, watching. The logical part of my brain kept trying to explain it away. Maybe it was a reflection. Maybe the camera glitched. Maybe I was imagining things. But deep down, I knew what I saw, and I knew I wasn't going to ignore it anymore. At 10:30 p.m., I turned off every light in my apartment. I wanted my eyes adjusted to the darkness. If something happened, I wanted to see it clearly. At 11 p.m., my phone buzzed, earlier than usual. A message from Walter. "Please don't do anything stupid tonight." I stared at the screen. I hadn't told him about the camera. I hadn't told him about the figure, yet somehow he seemed to know exactly what I was planning. 11:10 p.m. Another message. "Trust me." 11:12 p.m. "Stay away from the window." I didn't respond. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it. Then the clock changed. 11:13 p.m. At first, nothing happened. Then every sound outside stopped. No traffic. No distant conversations. No wind. Nothing. The silence felt wrong, like someone had muted the entire world. Slowly, I walked toward the curtain. One step, then another. My hands were shaking. Every instinct told me to stop. Instead, I grabbed the fabric and pulled. The street outside looked completely normal. Empty sidewalks, parked cars, streetlights. For a second, I actually laughed. I couldn't believe I had spent weeks being scared of absolutely nothing. Then I noticed something. Every parked car on the street was empty. But all their headlights were on. Every single one, at the exact same time. My smile disappeared. A second later, someone stepped into view. A man, wearing dark clothes, walking slowly down the middle of the road. Then another appeared behind him. Then another. Then another. Within seconds, there were dozens. None of them were speaking. None of them were looking at each other. They were all walking in the same direction, toward the end of the street. Toward an old abandoned building I had never paid attention to before. I watched in complete confusion. Then one of them stopped, slowly turning his head directly toward my apartment. My stomach dropped. Even from 3 floors up, I could tell he was looking at me. Then every other person stopped too. One by one, all turning toward my building, Toward my window, toward me. I immediately stepped back. My heart nearly exploded. That wasn't possible. There had to be 50 people outside, maybe more. And every single one was staring upward. The room suddenly felt freezing cold. Then my phone rang. Walter. I answered immediately. What the hell is happening? For the first time since I met him, he sounded angry. I told you not to look. Who are those people? They aren't the problem. What does that mean? There was a long pause. Then Walter said something that made no sense. Did any of them look familiar? I froze, because one of them actually had. At the very back of the crowd, just for a second. I thought I recognized someone impossible, someone who couldn't be there. My older brother. The problem was my brother lived over 1,000 miles away. And when I called him 5 minutes later, he answered from his apartment. So who had I seen? Listen carefully, Walter said. Leave your apartment. What? Right now. Before I could ask why, the call disconnected. Then someone knocked on my front door. 3 slow knocks. My blood ran cold. Nobody should have been upstairs. I looked through the peephole. Nothing. The hallway was empty. Then another knock. This time louder. I opened the door. Nobody there. Just an envelope lying on the floor. My hands trembled as I picked it up. Inside was a photograph. The picture showed my apartment building, taken from across the street. The timestamp on the photo was tonight, 11:13 p.m. I stared at the image, then noticed something horrifying. There was a person standing in my window, looking out. The problem? The person wasn't me. I was standing in my hallway when the photo was taken, yet someone had been inside my apartment, watching from my window. And whatever was standing there looked exactly like me. I don't think I've ever felt fear like that before. I stood in the hallway, staring at the photograph, while my brain desperately tried to find a logical explanation. Someone had taken a picture of my apartment minutes earlier. Someone had been standing in my window, and somehow that person looked exactly like me. Same height, same build, same posture. The image was blurry, but not blurry enough to dismiss. My phone rang again. Walter. This time I answered immediately. You need to leave the building. His voice sounded different, not scared, panicked. Tell me what's happening. No? Then I'm not going anywhere. A few seconds of silence followed. Then Walter sighed. I knew this would happen eventually. What would? You looked. I heard him lock something on his side of the phone. Then he continued. Meet me downstairs. The call ended. For a moment, I considered staying where I was. Then I heard movement inside my apartment, a chair scraping across the floor. I froze, because I was standing outside my apartment. There should have been nobody inside. Slowly, I backed away from the door. Then another sound. Footsteps. Moving through my living room. My heart nearly stopped. I didn't wait for a third sound. I ran, down 3 flights of stairs, straight into the lobby. Walter was already waiting. For the first time since I met him, he looked exhausted, like a man carrying a burden for years. Without saying a word, he handed me a set of keys. What are these? My office. You have an office? He nodded. Across town. Then he pointed toward the street. Get in the car. For 20 minutes, neither of us spoke. Finally, we arrived at a small warehouse near an industrial district. Nothing about the place looked special. Walter unlocked the front door. Inside were dozens of filing cabinets, shelves, boxes, thousands of documents. I stared around in confusion. What is this? Walter looked at me. It's 27 years of records. My stomach tightened. Records of what? He walked to a cabinet and pulled out a folder. Then another. Then another. Every folder contained photographs. People standing in windows, different apartments, different houses, different cities, different years. The same expression on every face. Confusion, fear, disbelief. I opened one. The person looked exactly like the owner of the house. Another, same thing. Another, same thing. My pulse accelerated. What am I looking at? Walter sat down heavily. Then he finally told me the truth, or at least part of it. For almost 30 years, people have been reporting the same thing. He pointed at one photograph. They look outside. Another photograph. They see someone who looks exactly like them. Another photograph. Then strange things start happening. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. So you're saying this happened to all these people? Walter nodded. Every one of them. I looked through more files. There had to be hundreds, maybe thousands. Then I noticed something. Some files were thick. Others were almost empty. What determines how much is in a file? Walter didn't answer immediately. Finally, he said, "How long they stayed alive?" The room became silent. I stared at him. What? Walter looked away. Most people become obsessed. My throat felt dry. Obsessed with what? Finding out why. He opened another folder. Inside were newspaper articles. Missing persons. Unexplained disappearances. People abandoning jobs, families, entire lives. All after reporting the same thing. A person in the window. A copy of themselves, watching. I wanted to laugh. The story sounded insane, yet I had seen the photograph. I had heard the footsteps. I knew something was wrong. Then I noticed one final folder sitting alone on a desk. Unlike the others, it had a red sticker. Walter quickly moved it away. Too late. I had already seen the name, my file. A cold feeling spread through my chest. You already had a file for me? Walter closed his eyes. For several seconds he didn't speak. Then he nodded. Since before you moved in? The room suddenly felt smaller. What do you mean before I moved in? Walter looked directly at me, and for the first time all night, I saw genuine guilt in his eyes. I chose you. Everything stopped. What? I chose this apartment for you. I felt anger replacing fear. What are you talking about? Walter swallowed hard. The apartment wasn't random. My heart pounded. The landlord works for me. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. The advertisements. The lease. The apartment. It was all arranged. I stood up so fast the chair fell over. You set this up? Walter nodded slowly. Then he said the one sentence that changed everything. I was trying to save your life. I stared at Walter, waiting for him to tell me this was some kind of joke. It wasn't. You chose me? I asked. Walter nodded. I found you 6 months before you moved into the apartment. My anger was growing. Why? He opened my file. Inside were photographs, not from the apartment, from my daily life, me leaving work, me entering grocery stores, me sitting alone in coffee shops. I felt sick. What is this? Walter looked ashamed. Research. Research for what? He took a deep breath. Then finally, everything started making sense. Because none of this has anything to do with monsters. I said nothing. Walter continued. Or ghosts. He slid a photograph across the desk. It showed another man, early 30s, normal looking, ordinary. His name was Michael. Then another photo, another person, then another. What do they have in common? I studied the images. At first I saw nothing. Then it hit me. They all looked tired, exhausted, alone. Walter nodded. Exactly. I didn't understand. What does that have to do with anything? Walter leaned back in his chair. 27 years ago, I lost my wife. For the first time, his voice cracked. After she died, I started seeing things. The room was silent. I thought I was losing my mind. He looked down at his hands. I started noticing people who looked exactly like me. My pulse quickened. The same thing I saw? Yes. Walter nodded. I saw them in reflections. He paused. In windows. Another pause. In crowds. I suddenly knew where this was going. The realization made my stomach drop. Walter continued. It wasn't supernatural. It was grief. He pointed at another file. Then another, then another. Every person here was going through something. Loss, depression, isolation, divorce, financial collapse, addiction, trauma. Every single file contained a person whose life was falling apart. The room felt completely different now. The mystery wasn't becoming stranger, it was becoming real. The people in the windows aren't real, Walter said quietly. Then why do we see them? Because our brains are trying to warn us. I stared at him. What? Walter nodded. Most people don't realize how badly they're struggling. He pointed to a report. Sleep deprivation. Another. Depression. Another. Anxiety. Another. Isolation. He sighed. Sometimes the brain creates patterns. I remembered the figure outside my window, the photo, the footsteps, everything. Walter looked at me. You moved into that apartment 3 months after losing your father. My throat tightened. I hadn't mentioned that, not once. Walter continued, you were living alone. You stopped seeing friends. You stopped answering calls. You stopped caring about anything. Every word hit harder than the last, because he wasn't wrong. After my father died, I'd slowly disconnected from everyone. I just never noticed it happening. Then Walter said something I'll never forget. The figure in the window isn't a monster. It's the person you become if nothing changes. The room became completely silent. For several seconds, I couldn't speak. Finally, I looked down at the photograph. The one showing someone who looked exactly like me. Same posture, same empty expression, same loneliness. And suddenly I understood why it looked familiar. Because it wasn't showing a stranger. It was showing me. The version of me I'd been turning into for months. Walter watched my reaction. Then he smiled sadly. The money was never about the rule. What was it about? Getting your attention. I sat there stunned. 27 years, thousands of files, hundreds of people. Not because Walter was hunting them, because he was trying to help them. I realized something after my wife died, he said. People ignore advice. He laughed softly. They ignore warnings. Another pause. But they don't ignore mysteries. I couldn't help smiling, because he was right. If Walter had simply knocked on my door and said, "Hey, you seem depressed," I would have ignored him. Instead, he created a mystery so strange that I became obsessed. Obsessed enough to finally confront the things I'd been avoiding. The loneliness, the grief, the isolation, everything. Suddenly, the entire story made sense. The reminders, the money, the files, even the apartment. Walter wasn't protecting me from something outside. He was trying to save me from myself. A few months later, I moved out, not because I was scared, because I didn't need the apartment anymore. I started reconnecting with old friends, started seeing family again, started living instead of simply existing. Walter and I still talk occasionally. He's older now, much older, And every time I visit him, there's another file on his desk. Another person, another mystery, another life he's quietly trying to save. The funny thing is, I still don't know whether I believe all of his explanations. Maybe the figure in the window was just my imagination. Maybe it wasn't. Maybe some questions don't need answers. What I do know is this. The night I finally looked outside, I thought I was going to discover a terrifying secret. Instead, I discovered something far worse. How close I had come to becoming a stranger to myself. And honestly, that scared me more than anything I could have seen in the dark. So tell me, if someone offered you $500 a month to follow one strange rule, would you take the money? Or would your curiosity win?